Officer Alex Foster had only been working in the small town for a few weeks, and he was still trying to learn the ropes. The town was quiet, a bit too quiet for someone who had spent years working in the city. Here, there weren't many crimes to solve, but Alex was determined to make a difference. He spent his days driving around, trying to learn the streets, the local businesses, and the people. One chilly afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Alex was driving through the residential area when he noticed a man walking quickly along a narrow side street. The man was dressed in a dark hoodie, his head down, and he was walking in a way that seemed hurried, almost like he was trying to avoid being seen. Alex's instincts kicked in. Something didn't feel right. His mind immediately jumped to the most recent news report he'd seen about a fugitive who had been on the run for weeks. The fugitive was a man who had committed a string of robberies in neighboring towns and had managed to slip through the police's fingers more than once. His description matched the man walking down the street. Same height, same build, same dark clothing. Without thinking twice, Alex hit the brakes and pulled over to the curb. He grabbed his radio and called for backup, his voice steady but urgent. Possible suspect in the area. I'm going to approach, he said. He didn't want to take any chances. He had read too many stories about officers who hesitated, and he wasn't going to be one of those cops. He stepped out of the car, keeping his hand on his holstered gun. The man hadn't noticed him yet, so Alex took the opportunity to get closer, keeping a safe distance. As he approached, the man finally looked up, and their eyes met. Alex's heart skipped a beat. There was something familiar about this guy's face, but in the moment, he couldn't quite place it. "Hey, you! Stop!" Alex shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. The man froze, looking confused but not scared. Alex stepped closer, his hand still on his gun. "I need you to put your hands where I can see them. You're under suspicion for robbery." The man's eyebrows furrowed. "What? Robbery? I don't know what you're talking about." He took a step back, his eyes darting around nervously. Alex was certain now. This was the fugitive. He was calm, calculating, and trying to get away. "Don't move," Alex warned, his voice steady. "I said don't move." The man held up his hands in a defensive gesture, but Alex wasn't buying it. "What's your name?" Alex demanded. The man hesitated for a moment before answering. "James Hamilton," he said, his tone not quite matching the urgency Alex expected. "Don't lie to me," Alex snapped. "I know who you are. You're wanted for a string of burglaries." But then, something clicked. The name, James Hamilton. Alex stopped in his tracks, realizing he had heard the name before, just not in the context he expected. His heart sank. Could this be the mayor? Alex's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. The name James Hamilton echoed in his head. Could this really be the mayor? The thought was almost too ridiculous to consider, but the more Alex looked at the man in front of him, the more uncertain he became. The guy didn't look like the fugitive he'd seen on the news, but something about him felt off. He was too calm, too collected for someone who was on the run. Despite his growing doubts, Alex wasn't ready to let his guard down. He had a job to do, and he was determined to do it right. "I can't make mistakes," he thought. "Not this time." "Stay where you are," Alex said, his voice firmer now. He pulled out his phone and dialed for backup again, his hands slightly shaking as he spoke. "I've got a suspect here. I need backup. Possible fugitive. I'm going to need identification." The man, James Hamilton, looked at him like he was crazy. "Listen, officer, you've got this all wrong. I'm just out for a walk. There's no need for any of this." His voice was calm, but there was an edge of frustration in it, like he was trying to explain something simple to someone who wasn't getting it. Alex didn't listen. He kept his eyes locked on the man. "Show me your ID. Now." James sighed and shook his head. "Seriously, I'm the mayor. Look, here's my ID." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a wallet. For a second, Alex thought about backing down, but there was no way he was going to risk it. He needed to be sure. He grabbed the ID from James's hand and glanced at it. His heart skipped a beat as he looked at the name printed on the card. James Hamilton, Mayor of Parkridge. Alex blinked twice, staring at the card in disbelief. This couldn't be right. The mayor, the man who had been in every town meeting, in every local news story, the same man who had helped organize community events, who everyone seemed to respect. The last person who could be a criminal. He felt like he was in a bad dream. His hands trembled slightly as he looked up from the ID and met the mayor's eyes. Mayor Hamilton, he stammered, feeling his face turn red with embarrassment. You're... James cut him off with a sharp laugh. Yes, I'm the mayor. I told you. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The air between them was thick with tension. Alex's mind struggled to wrap around the truth of what was happening. His initial gut feeling had been wrong. He had accused the mayor of being a fugitive. The man who led the town, who was a face everyone knew. He was standing here, and Alex had just made a huge mistake. As the seconds passed, the weight of his mistake started to sink in. Alex could feel the ground beneath him shift, his confidence crumbling into embarrassment. Then, just as the silence was about to swallow him whole, the sound of sirens approached. Backup was on the way. But it wasn't just the backup Alex had called for. The entire situation was about to get a lot more complicated. The sirens grew louder, and soon 2 more squad cars pulled up behind Alex's patrol car. The backup officers piled out, looking confused as they saw the scene unfolding. Alex stood frozen, holding the mayor's ID in his hand, his mind spinning. He couldn't believe it. How had he messed this up so badly? One of the backup officers, a senior cop named Detective Daniels, approached with a puzzled look on his face. "What's going on here, Foster?" he asked, looking at Alex and then at the man standing in front of him. The mayor. Alex's throat went dry. He didn't know how to explain it. How could he tell his colleagues that he'd mistaken the most recognized man in town for a criminal? He had to say something, though. The silence felt suffocating. This is James Hamilton," Alex stammered, holding up the ID. The mayor. Detective Daniels blinked and then looked at the mayor. "Wait, are you serious?" He seemed to be processing the information, but it was clear he couldn't believe it either. James Hamilton. The mayor sighed and adjusted his jacket. "Yes, I'm the mayor of Parkridge." "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Officer Foster here decided to stop me in the street and accuse me of being a fugitive." He shook his head as if he couldn't believe it either. Alex felt like a fool standing there, holding the ID like it was some kind of shield. His face burned with embarrassment. He had read the description of the fugitive in the police briefing, but the guy he'd seen on the street didn't match it perfectly. The man he had stopped had been walking fast, wearing a hoodie, and acting suspiciously. But that didn't mean he was a criminal. He had been so sure, so certain in that moment. Detective Daniels glanced over at Alex, a hard look in his eyes. "Foster, what were you thinking?" he asked, his voice low. "You can't just stop people based on assumptions. This could have gone a lot differently, you know." Alex opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? How could he explain that he had been so eager to catch someone, to do his job right, that he had let his gut instinct override his better judgment? James Hamilton crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. "I've got a schedule to keep," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I don't appreciate being stopped by an officer who doesn't even know who I am." Alex swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Mayor Hamilton. I made a mistake. I didn't recognize you right away, and I thought you were someone else." The mayor's expression softened for just a second, but he didn't let up. A mistake is one thing, but this could have been handled a lot better. He glanced over at the other officers, who were standing awkwardly by, unsure of what to do next. I'm not just some guy off the street. You don't just assume things like that." Alex nodded, his head hanging low. There was nothing else he could say. He had messed up, and there was no way around it. His rookie mistake had just embarrassed not only him, but also the whole department. As the awkward silence stretched on, Alex could hear the murmurs from the small crowd of onlookers who had gathered nearby. Some of them had been watching the entire scene unfold, and Alex could hear the whispers of disbelief. "That's the mayor," one woman asked, her voice tinged with surprise. "What kind of cop doesn't know the mayor?" Alex couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. He had made a huge mistake, and it was one that wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. Alex stood there, his feet rooted to the ground as the awkward silence stretched on. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of his mistake was starting to feel unbearable. The crowd of onlookers, now a bit bigger, was whispering among themselves, casting curious glances his way. He could hear them clearly, as if their words were directed straight at him. "Isn't that the mayor? What's going on?" one of them asked, sounding confused. "I thought that cop was supposed to be watching out for people like that fugitive," another voice murmured. "What's he doing stopping the mayor?" The whispers stung, and Alex's face burned even hotter. He wanted to crawl into a hole and hide. His rookie mistake was now the talk of the entire neighborhood, and he had no one to blame but himself. Mayor Hamilton, on the other hand, was calm, almost annoyingly so. His face, though stern, didn't show any signs of anger. But it was clear he wasn't happy. He glanced over at Alex again, his eyes narrowing slightly. "So, Officer Foster," the mayor began, his voice steady but still carrying a hint of annoyance. "What happens now? Do I get an apology or a report?" Alex opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out right away. He knew he had to apologize. He knew he had to make this right. But the apology felt hollow, like a Band-Aid over a much deeper cut. I'm really sorry, Mayor Hamilton," Alex finally managed to say. His voice cracked slightly, but he powered through. "I got it wrong. I thought you were someone else. I didn't recognize you, and I made a bad judgment call." The mayor didn't say anything at first, just standing there, his arms still crossed. It wasn't until Detective Daniels spoke up that the mayor nodded slowly. "All right then," he said, his tone softer now. "But this is something I expect you to learn from, officer. This town doesn't appreciate being treated like criminals without reason." Alex nodded quickly, his throat tight. "I understand. It won't happen again." There was a moment of quiet, and then, surprisingly, the mayor spoke again, his voice a little more understanding. "I know you're new around here, officer. Everyone makes mistakes. Just make sure this doesn't become a pattern." The crowd of onlookers had begun to disperse, some of them still looking over their shoulders with curiosity, but the tension had started to ease. Detective Daniels gave Alex a small, almost disappointed look, but didn't say anything else. Alex could feel the eyes of his fellow officers on him, but this time, it wasn't judgment he felt. It was a silent warning. He had a lot to prove now. This wasn't just about being right. It was about trust. Trust in the badge, trust in the decisions he made, and trust in himself. The mayor's eyes softened a little more, and he gave Alex a small nod before turning away to leave. "I've got a meeting to get to," he said, his voice still firm, but no longer angry. "But next time, I expect a little more respect for my office, all right?" Alex stood there, watching the mayor walk away, feeling a mixture of relief and shame. He had learned an important lesson today, one that would stick with him forever. But it wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning of the consequences he'd have to face for his mistake. The next morning, Alex couldn't shake off the events from the day before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mayor's calm face, the disappointment in the eyes of his fellow officers, and the whispers of the crowd. It was as if the whole town had seen his mistake. He had never felt more humiliated in his life. He had let everyone down. As Alex sat at the breakfast table, His mind kept replaying the moment when he had thought he was doing the right thing. The truth was, it hadn't been a matter of just a bad gut feeling. He had let his eagerness to do his job and make a difference cloud his judgment. And now he was paying for it. Just then, his phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Detective Daniels. "Meet me at the station in 30. We need to talk." Alex stared at the message for a moment, wondering what this was about. Was he in trouble? Had the mayor said something to Daniels? He wasn't sure, but he couldn't avoid it. He had to face the music, whatever it was. He quickly finished his coffee and got ready. The whole drive to the station, his mind raced with questions. What would Daniels say? Was he going to be reprimanded? Was his career in danger because of one mistake? When he arrived at the police station, he was met with the familiar smell of stale coffee and the sound of officers typing away at their desks. It felt different now. The hum of activity seemed to highlight his own nervousness. He made his way to Daniel's office, his feet dragging with each step. "Foster, come on in," Daniels called as Alex knocked on the door. Alex walked in, unsure of what to expect. Detective Daniels was sitting at his desk, looking over a pile of paperwork. But when he looked up, there was no anger in his eyes. Instead, there was something different, something that felt more like understanding. "Sit down," Daniels said, motioning to the chair across from him. Alex sat down, his hands tense in his lap. "You wanted to talk." Daniels nodded. "Yeah. I know you've been beating yourself up about what happened yesterday. And I get it. You made a mistake. We all do. But you've got to understand something, Foster. You don't learn from your mistakes by running away from them. You learn by facing them." Alex swallowed hard. He had expected to hear some kind of reprimand, maybe a harsh word or two. But Daniel's tone was calm, almost reassuring. "I'm not going to lie," Daniels continued, leaning back in his chair. "You made a huge error in judgment, but it's not the end of the world. The thing is, you're new, and new officers are going to make mistakes. The key is how you bounce back from them." Alex nodded slowly. He hadn't expected this kind of conversation. He had thought he'd be getting a lecture, but instead, Daniels was offering him advice. He felt a small sense of relief. "You've got potential, Foster," Daniels said, his voice firm but encouraging. "Don't let one mistake define you. Learn from it and keep moving forward." Alex felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. Maybe this wasn't the end of his career after all. Maybe it was just the beginning. It was a tough lesson, but he was starting to see it for what it was. A chance to grow, to do better next time. "Thanks, Detective," Alex said quietly. "I won't let it happen again." Daniels gave him a small smile. "Good. Now, let's get back to work." The days following Alex's conversation with Detective Daniels felt like a blur. He worked harder than ever, focusing on the details, making sure not to rush into things. The mistake with the mayor still lingered in the back of his mind, but it wasn't the only thing that mattered anymore. He realized that what truly mattered was how he handled himself moving forward. The next few weeks saw Alex become more diligent, more cautious. Every decision he made, no matter how small, was calculated. He double-checked his reports, asked for feedback from his colleagues, and tried to stay focused on the job. He knew he couldn't undo what had happened with the mayor, but he could control what happened next. One afternoon, while Alex was going over some paperwork, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. He answered it quickly, unsure of who it might be. "Hello," he said, his voice steady but slightly hesitant. "Is this Officer Alex Foster?" A calm voice on the other end asked. "Yes, speaking. This is Mayor Hamilton. I'm calling to request a meeting with you." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The mayor. He had been hoping to avoid this moment, but now here it was. His mistake was still fresh in the mayor's mind, and he had to face the consequences head-on. "Of course, Mayor," Alex replied, his voice as composed as he could manage. "When would you like to meet?" "How about tomorrow afternoon?" Mayor Hamilton said. "We'll meet at City Hall. It'll be a chance to clear the air." Alex felt a mix of nerves and curiosity. What did the mayor want to talk about? Was this a chance to apologize again, or was there more to it? He quickly agreed to the meeting and hung up. The next day, Alex arrived at City Hall early. The building was quiet, and the staff seemed busy with their own tasks. He walked into the mayor's office, his heart pounding. Mayor Hamilton was already there, sitting behind a large wooden desk. He looked up as Alex entered and gave him a nod. "Good to see you, officer," the mayor said, his tone neutral. "Please, have a seat." Alex sat down, his hands slightly sweaty but trying to stay calm. He was here to make things right. He didn't know what the mayor's intentions were, but he knew he had to take responsibility for his actions. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened that day," Mayor Hamilton began, his voice measured. "You're new to this job, and mistakes are bound to happen. But I also know that you're someone who will learn from them." Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. The mayor wasn't angry. He wasn't going to make this harder than it already was. "I appreciate you saying that, sir," Alex replied, grateful for the understanding in the mayor's voice. "I won't make the same mistake again." The mayor nodded. "Good. You're going to make an excellent officer, Foster, but it's important to remember that this town looks to its officers for protection and trust. You're part of something bigger now." Alex listened closely, understanding the weight of the mayor's words. This wasn't just about a mistake. It was about the responsibility he had as an officer and the trust the community placed in him. As they continued to talk, Alex felt the weight of the past few weeks lift off his shoulders. The mayor wasn't holding the mistake over his head. Instead, he was offering guidance, a second chance. It was a turning point. Alex was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. The meeting with Mayor Hamilton left Alex feeling more confident than he had in weeks. As he left City Hall, the weight of his mistake didn't seem as heavy anymore. It was still there, but it no longer defined him. What mattered now was how he carried himself moving forward, and how he proved that he could handle the responsibility of being an officer. The next few days were calm, with nothing unusual happening in the town. Alex continued his patrols, working closely with his colleagues. But even in the quiet moments, he could feel a shift in how people saw him. The whispers that had followed him after the mayor incident started to fade, replaced by a sense of respect. His fellow officers noticed the effort he was putting in, the way he was learning from his past mistake. One afternoon, as Alex was reviewing his notes on a recent case, Detective Daniels approached him. "Got a minute?" he asked, his usual serious expression softening a little. "Of course," Alex replied, standing up from his desk. Daniels motioned for him to follow and led him to a quieter area of the station. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "I've been hearing good things about you lately. The mayor said he was impressed with your attitude after the whole thing." Alex felt a bit of pride swell in his chest. The mayor had actually spoken well of him. That was more than he had expected. "You're not perfect. No one is," Daniels continued, "but what I've seen from you these last few weeks, you're learning, and that's what matters most." Alex nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had spent so much time worrying about the mistake, but now he realized that what truly counted was the effort to improve. The town, the police department, they had seen his growth. As the days turned into weeks, Alex felt more at home in the role. He started building stronger relationships with the people in the community, especially the local businesses and residents. He no longer worried about being judged for one mistake, because he knew he was showing everyone who he was through his actions. One evening, as Alex walked through the town square after his shift, he noticed Mayor Hamilton standing outside a cafe, chatting with some of the locals. Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he approached. The mayor spotted him and gave a small wave. "Officer Foster," he greeted with a smile. "I hear you're making quite the impression around here." Alex returned the smile, a little more confidently now. "I'm just doing my job, sir." Mayor Hamilton chuckled. "You're doing more than that. You've earned the trust of this community. Keep it up." Alex nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude. It wasn't just about proving himself to his colleagues anymore. It was about proving to the people of the town that they could count on him. And with each passing day, he was doing just that. As he walked away, he realized that the road to redemption wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. The mistake he had made with the mayor would always be part of his story, but it didn't define him. What mattered was what he had learned from it and how he had grown. In the end, Alex knew that he had earned the respect of both the mayor and the community, not by being perfect, but by showing them that he was capable of learning, improving, and becoming the kind of officer they could trust.